Welcome to Branching with Google Forms. This video is going to cover the basics on what is branching and how to set it up. So I've got some example questions here just to get the mental layout in our brains. So there are two main questions, question 1 and question 2. Each question has two options that you can choose. So within question 1, you can choose option 1 or option 2. If you choose option 1, you then are presented with sub-option I or sub-option II. The same with option number 2. You have two sub-option choices. So if I was a test taker, I would go into question 1, I'd see these two options, I might choose option 2, I'd then see these two options, and I might choose this option. Then I would be presented with question 2, which has two options, and each of these options, again, has two sub-options. So for question 2, I might choose option A, sub-option A. So let's see what this looks like in practice. So I'm going to go back to my Google Drive, and I'm going to start a new Google form. I'm going to call this Business Class Signups. Now I do have a layout for this, so let me go back to this document. If I scroll down, you can see that I have business teachers labeled here, and there are 3 teachers, Mrs. Hebert, Mrs. McCandless, and Mrs. Smith, and each teacher has 3 classes that you can sign up for. So Mrs. Smith has Business English, Tech Integration Leadership, and Introduction to Business Management. Mrs. McCandless has Accounting, Mobile App Design, and Database Excel. And Mrs. Hebert has Introduction to Web Page Development, IT Essentials, and Intro to Animation. So we're going to, on our form, I'm going to provide each one of these options for the students. So again, we're calling this form Business Class Signups. So my question is simply choose a business teacher to take a class with. It's a little elementary, but bear with me. So I've entered in my 3 teacher choices, Mrs. Hebert, Mrs. McCandless, and Mrs. Smith. I want to make sure that it is a multiple choice question. So again, here are our choices. I'm going to make this a required question. Then I'm going to add a section, because this is where once you provide a question that has sub-options, you have to make a clean break, a section break. So we'll call this first section, at least for now, Mrs. Hebert. And then I'm going to add a question. And again, it's going to be, so choose a class to take with Mrs. Hebert. Again, it should be multiple choice. And because I've already got it typed in, I'm going to simply copy, come back to my form, and paste. I'm going to copy my second class option. And down here, I'm going to paste it. Then I'm going to offer a third choice, Intro to Animation. So again, they're going to choose which teacher, in this case Mrs. Hebert. Here's Mrs. Hebert and the 3 class choices. I need to again make sure that this is required. And then based on their choices, they're going to be taken to yet another page. So I'm going to put in another section break. And I'm going to call this first section Intro to Web Development. I'm going to add some text because I'm going to copy the course description straight out of the course description book. And then I'm going to add the question. Sign up for this class. I have to choose multiple choice. I'm going to say yes or no. Again, I'm going to make this required. So you always want to make sure that your questions are required. And this is where, so that's the first section for the first class. The second class, IT Essentials, I'm just going to copy the title here. So I'm going to come back down to the very end and choose that question. I'm going to add another section. Again, we're going to call this the second class title, and I'm going to set it up just like I did here with the course description and then sign up yes or no. I'm going to get this all in for each of the classes for the teachers, and then I'll come back to you. So I finished putting in all of my information for the basic underlying part of my branching Google form. So I've got my original question with the 3 teacher options, and then I've got 3 sections for each teacher, and under each teacher there are sub options. So here's Mrs. Hebert, which class, here are your different choices, and then based on these choices, Intro to Web Development is a choice, IT Essentials is a choice, and Intro to Animation is a choice, and you'll see that each one of these is a new section. I've got Mrs. McCandless and her 3 courses, and under that are a section for each of her 3 courses: Accounting, Mobile App Design, and Database Excel. And finally, there's Mrs. Smith. She has 3 courses, and each course is listed as a new section. The other thing that I ensured was, as I was going through this, that each of the last questions is required. This is just text, so it's not a required, but you must make sure that each of your questions is required. Otherwise, your form participants don't need to complete that question. So now let's go back up to the very top, and this is where we have to force them to make some choices. So I'm going to click in my original question. We've made it a multiple choice. It is required. I'm going to come over here to the hot dogs, the more buttons. When I click on that, I get some sub options. And what I want to do, this is where you can shuffle around the arrangement of questions in a quiz. This is where you can give this question a little description, but what we want is this go to section based on answer. So when I click that, this section is added to this question, and what I can do is say, if they choose Mrs. Hebert, they're going to be taken to Mrs. Hebert's section. So I'm going to say right here, Mrs. Hebert. When they choose Mrs. McCandless, they're going to go right here to Mrs. McCandless, and when they choose Mrs. Smith, they're going to be taken to Mrs. Smith. And this is why it's a good idea to lay out on paper how your branching is going to work prior to actually starting to put your form together. It goes a whole lot quicker if you do it that way. So again, my layout was on the paper here. I started with this kind of an idea, and then I put it into my example. You could do branching this way. You could start with your question here and do branching going down. So let me just show you real quick. I'm going to insert a drawing, and I could have done it like this. Here's my question. I'm going to lay this out and then I'll explain it to you. Give me a second. So this is what branching might look like as you lay it out if you were to do it in a tree format. This is more the roots of the tree instead of the branches coming up from the main trunk, but you get the idea. So it's question 1. There are 3 options that you can choose from. If you choose option B, these are your 3 choices. If you choose option C, these are your 3 choices. And if you were to choose option A, these are your 3 choices. So again, that's just kind of laying out your branching so that you can visually understand what you're asking your participants to do, but it also keeps it clear in your head, did I get each one of the steps done? So let me come back to the form. So I connected Mrs. Hebert to the Mrs. Hebert section. That's the main section that talks about the classes. I now have to connect each class option to the class description. So again, I'm going to come down to the hot dogs, to the more buttons, and I'm going to say go to section based on answer. So if they choose the Intro to Web Page Development, they'll be taken to Intro to Web Page Development. This is why I named each section header by the class name. So the IT Essentials goes to IT Essentials, and Intro to Animation goes to Intro to Animation. I'm going to skip down to Mrs. McCandless's class and do the same thing here. So again, choose the question, go to the hot dogs, choose go to section based on, and I'm going to choose for accounting. I'm going to choose accounting, mobile app design, and for database Excel. And then I'm going to go down to Mrs. Smith's section, go to the hot dogs, go to section, and then I'm going to line these up. So there's Business English, Tech Integration, and finally Intro to Business Management. Okay, so I've done the second layer. Now I need to do the last layer. Do I want to sign up for this class? Do I want to sign up for this class? And do I want to sign up for this class? And then based on the answer to this question, you can do a couple of things. I'm going to come down to the hot dogs again, go back to go to section based on answer. And here I can either take them somewhere else, or I can just have them submit the form. Or maybe we bring them back to the teacher page. Or better yet, maybe we bring them back to the very top where they have to choose again which teacher. So I'm going to set these up and I'll be back in a second. So I'm almost done setting up my choice for the last question. Do you want to sign up for this class? So again, I click in the question, I go to the hot dogs, I choose go to section based on answer. And if they choose yes, we're going to submit the form. And if they say no, they're going to come back to the business class signups. And then the last one, again, I click in the class, I go to the hot dogs, go to section based on answer is chosen. So for yes, they're going to submit the form. No, they're going to go back up to the business class signups. So now I think I've got this pretty well laid out. So now it's time to test it. So I'm going to go to preview and business class signups, choose a business teacher to take a class with. If I go to Mrs. Hebert and I click on next, it gives me her 3 classes. Maybe I want to check out Intro to Animation. I click next. Do I want to sign up for this class? I say yes, and I click next, and then I submit my form. I left the submit another response on this. So maybe I go into Mrs. Smith's class and I say next. I want to sign up for Introduction to Business. I click next. I read the course description. Do I want to sign up for this class? No, I don't. So it's going to take me back to the very beginning and I can go look at Mrs. McCandless's classes. So maybe I want to take this mobile app design. Oh, that sounds cool. What's that class about again? Oh, here's my description. Do I want to sign up for this class? Yes, I do. And I would submit the form. If I clicked on no, it would take me back to the listing of the teachers. So I'm going to say yes. I'm going to click on next. And now I can submit it. To undo this, so let me go back to, I'm going to close this tab and I'm going to come back to my design layout. So if I go up to the gear, I can restrict or not restrict users to be within Upper Adams, but the presentation, this is where it says to submit another response. So you can leave this there or you can turn this off. Underneath the presentation, you can either leave this default confirmation message, your response has been recorded, or you can change it. And I'm going to click on save. And so here's my confirmation message. Now I've personalized it a little bit more. It says, thank you for choosing one of the business education courses for next year. Your guidance counselor will be in touch with you. And you click save. And that's how to set up branching in Google Forms.